My name again is Chris Meyer. I'll be moderating this last portion of our program. At the risk of oversimplification, we have spoken so far about the past, and we're now going to switch to the future. As you can see, we have a mighty and distinguished panel of experts assembled in front of you today. We are not going to do the usual 10-minute blocks of speeches, but move immediately into an interactive mode, and I welcome your participation from the audience. Just raise your hand if you like. If you don't want to speak, you can fill out one of those cards, but my experience at IEF is that people are not all that shy. I've also let our panelists know that they're invited to interact with each other, with me, with the audience. So if anybody wants to jump in and let the conversation take off in a different direction, that's the path that we will follow. Well, I think we've done a good job of setting the stage so far. Pat McGrain, when I heard him say that he worries more about flooding and water storage in this basin than anywhere else in the West, that was a red flag and a moment of concern for me. And so we now have an opportunity to chat with a number of folks. Mayor John Evans is with us today, the mayor of Garden City, Ellen Berggren, Army Corps of Engineers, Bill Clayton, the chair of the Flood Control District Number 10, which has been mentioned earlier today. Liz Paul of Idaho Rivers United is back with us. Jay Aldine from the Truckee River Flood Project, who just gave the last presentation. We've asked him to stay up on the podium here to continue his dialogue, and Brian Patton, who was not on the printed materials, but we recognized our great oversight, and he was gracious enough to agree to participate at the last minute to complete the conversation that we anticipate having. Let me begin just by asking each of the panelists, we'll just start over on the far left, and if you'll just say a few words of introduction. I have written materials for each one of you, but rather than subject the audience to listening to me read those materials, why don't you just highlight a few comments about your passion and what brings you to your professional position and what your interest is in being here today.
My name is Bill Clayton. Can everybody hear me? There's only one mic, so I'm going to try. I had the chuckle professional position. I have a tree farm. I raise large trees for landscaping. I happen to live on the Boise River. My grandfather came here in 1903 from the Basque Country. In 1931, he bought 67 acres on the Boise River, a mile downstream from Star. I was raised in Northern California, didn't miss a birthday here until I was 21, so I got to see what flooding was like and what it wasn't like. Cal Berkeley, Marine Corps, Vietnam, LA, oops, Idaho. And I've been in the cattle business. Our place is along the Boise River. I always have fun when people talk about Ada County and Canyon County, because they say, well, to the end of Ada County. Well, guess who's across the border in Canyon County? All these solutions until we get to Canyon County, and then so that's where my place is. We have about 2 miles river frontage, and I think that's plenty.
Ellen?
Hi, my name's Ellen Berggren. I'm with the Army Corps of Engineers, and I'm here to help. Seriously. I'm here, well, I've lived in Boise, I think it's about 24 years now, and my whole career here has been in the water resources field. I started out working for a law firm, working on timber and range and Idaho water law and mining issues. And then I got my first civil servant job. I worked for Department of Water Resources for the board, who's one of the partners I'm working with now, and did comprehensive state water plans. I worked with reclamation, doing study management. So I'd say most of my water background is more in irrigation or the water supply end of things. And I've been with Reclamation now for the last 3.5, almost 4 years, and so I'm getting up to speed here on flood risk reduction and navigation. And I'm here because I'm a project manager partnering with the Water Resource Board. Have also been involved in a lot of other smaller issues and studies in the Boise watershed and throughout the state dealing with flood risk. And I'm really excited that for once in my career I'm actually getting to work on a study doing something in my own community. So I know there have been some negative experiences with the Corps, but I want to tell you that this project manager is very committed to the success of the Corps study here in Boise.
There was a time back before Brayton and Debbie Willis in the Corps office here who recently moved on to greener pastures, but there was a time when the only time you interacted with the Corps official in Boise was when you were being handed a notice of violation, and we're glad to have Ellen here on an entirely different mission, so welcome, Ellen. Brian?
My name is Brian Patton. I am with the Idaho Department of Water Resources. I've been with the department for 17 years, 18 years. Graduate of the University of Idaho in civil engineering, lived in the valley most of my life. During my time with the department, I've held a number of different positions, including working as a project manager for the Water Resource Board on a number of their projects and studies that they've carried out, including managed recharge on the Eastern Snake Plain, construction of some other projects, their Dvorak Hydro project, including overseeing some of the comprehensive aquifer management plan activities that are currently going on, as well as this storage initiative that's been directed by the legislature, which one component of that is looking at storage on the Boise River, which is what I'll be talking about today.
There was an article in this Sunday's paper. The front page article was written by Rocky Barker, who is with us today. I thought it was a very nice piece, and it was also a little bit of foreshadowing for this very panel. Two of the people that were quoted extensively in that article are the last two who just introduced themselves to you. In addition, there were other notables. I mentioned Paul DeVoe, who's with us today and has been a previous speaker, along with Peter Anderson and Scott Reed, also past presenters for other IEF programs. That was, I thought that piece was a very useful one. Dig it out of your recycling if you didn't have a chance to read it already. And we're going to be picking up on some of those pieces. Liz, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Chris. Good afternoon. I'm Liz Paul. I work for Idaho Rivers United. If you'd like to learn about what Idaho Rivers United thinks about this issue of that water planning, you can go to our website and read our new fact sheet and see a little video we put together about that. By way of introduction, I live in Garden City, and although when our house was purchased, we were not in the floodplain, FEMA shouldn't have had to really spend very much money to discover that we were indeed in the floodplain. They could have just come back to our backyard where I was putting in a vegetable garden in basically a gravel bed because it was all rocks back there. And I could tell just with one push in of the shovel that I was indeed in the former bed of the Boise River in Garden City, which pretty much all of us in Garden City are. And so my job at Idaho Rivers United is to work on the Boise River and to help, my job is to help our members and the public at large be involved, be active participants in public policy making that has to do with me, with the Boise River, and our other staff, with other water and fisheries issues around the state. And we really are in the position of trying to be a bridge between the public and the decision makers.
Thank you, Liz. We're honored to have the mayor of Garden City with us here today. Mr. Mayor, will you introduce yourself?
My name's John Evans. I've been the mayor since January of 2006. One of the primary reasons I'm here is to remain close friends with Ellen Seriously, Garden City, as you saw in the earlier presentation, has a significant risk associated with flooding along the Boise River. We want to work closely with Drain District number 10, who we see as a partner in mitigating that risk. It's a very complex issue, as I've learned over the last number of years. Lots of discussions with Steve Sweet here. I knew Steve when his beard was dark. So that's been a while. My personal background, came to Idaho in 1975. I'm in the development business. Garden City mayor position is part-time, which I discovered rapidly is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a part-time mayor. But I have done a significant amount of work in the river as a developer. Actually ran my own underground cruise when we were doing projects along the river, so very familiar with some of the challenges associated with river maintenance, the movement of gravels through the river basin, some of the problems we create with development, and certainly am very concerned about the risk associated with flooding. So I'm not sure expert would apply to me. I think it does to the others here on the panel, but I do have a significant risk management interest as the mayor.
We're delighted to have you with us. Appreciate your squeezing this in along with your other part-time jobs. Jay, welcome back.
Well, let me do the shameless advertising, and that is truckyflood.us. There is a website. This is our map book of our project. It shows pictures, locations of elements. If you want to get an idea of what we considered project elements that you have to deal with, they're all listed in here. And it's downloadable, 330 meg files. Just, again, it's free, so it's just... I'm a 35-year civil engineer. Been in engineering my whole career. I've been dealing with water issues one way or the other, whether it's treatment of water, whether it's wastewater treatment, whether it's flood control or drainage work. This latest stint is as a flood control engineer, and so the engineering is the easy part, and I've always said that to our community. It is the easy part. It's the easy part for you folks as well. It just comes down to who you can sell what to and what you can get. So I've learned that in Truckee and in Reno. It's the same thing. And by the way, I want you to know that I was the advocate that kept us with the Corps on the project, just so that you know that, because I thought it was prudent to again, keep all avenues open. And so we followed that procedure.
Very good. Let me begin with a question to Ellen. Ellen, the Statesman, I waved this newspaper a little earlier. The Statesman quoted you as saying, but water supply is only a part of the question for the federal agencies. Protecting against flooding is as important to consider as protecting against drought. Can you put that in a little context? Give us a little bit of background, if you will, about the study that is underway, the role of the Corps, and you may want to pass the baton to Brian as you think appropriate. To tell us a little bit about the work that is being done to look at structural alternatives. We'll begin there, though by no means are we going to limit the conversation to structural alternatives.
Well, the Corps and the Water Resource Board are partnering on what's known as a feasibility study on the lower Boise River. And that study is focusing on finding solutions to meet future water needs as well as reducing flood risk. So it's what would be called a multiple purpose project. And we're really in the early stages of that study. And we have been looking at surface water storage as one possible measure or option to help meet future water needs in the Treasure Valley and flood risk at the request of the board. We're here. This isn't the Corps coming in and telling the community, here's the answer to your problems. It's of course, working with our sponsor and with the community to identify what the community wants to look at and what they want to consider for as possible solutions.
Ellen, can we get you to use that mic?
Sure.
I think if you just talking to that little bud.
Is that good?
One more.
Does that work?
Thank you.
So where we're at with the study, we've over the last couple of years, we started in 2009, and we have been focusing on surface water storage. And we picked up on a study where Reclamation left off. They had done an extensive literature review of possible surface water storage sites in the Boise Basin, and they were really focusing on water supply. So we were looking for sites that could meet both that water supply and flood risk, and we did a screening analysis of the 12 sites, narrowed it to 6 that we felt could provide water supply and flood risk reduction downstream of Lucky Peak. And then we did some additional data collection. We looked at things, we ranked sites in terms of their ability to reduce flood risk, provide water in the future. We did some very, very rough ballpark cost estimates. And we were also looking at ranking sites for those that would minimize social and environmental effects. A big environmental issue, as people are probably aware of, is we've got bull trout critical habitat from Arrow Rock upstream. So any new dams are going to be having to deal with Endangered Species Act. Where that screening analysis left us is we identified raising Arrow Rock about 72 feet. It would double, more than double the current storage. That came out as the top ranked option if surface water storage is what this community wants to consider for helping to address some of those problems. And we have we've done some very initial preliminary engineering analysis, just reviewing existing data to see if there are any major engineering or geological issues associated that would make it cost prohibitive or technically infeasible. And at this point in time, with consultation with Reclamation, we're proposing that any further study for surface water storage would look at raising the existing Arrow Rock Dam. And we will definitely be working very closely with Reclamation on this study. It is their dam. The feasibility authority from Congress comes to the Corps, so it's a Corps feasibility process, but Reclamation engineers, they're their expert on their dam, and they're actually the expert on raising dams of this type because they have done this before in other parts of the country. And so we'll be working with them, and of course along with the Water Resource Board, to move that study forward and to identify other alternatives. And I know maybe later we'll talk about structural, but the Corps will be looking at non-structural alternatives as well. We're required to do that. And I'm going to hand it off to Brian.
I've struggled a little bit here to put the right slide up, so if you'd like me to provide a visual for you, please let me know.
This is just a conceptual map of what footprint would look like. Could you turn that on slideshow so they could maximize that?
That one?
No, the next one, please. So the blue area shows you the existing extent of Arrow Rock Reservoir at full pool. What the yellow dash line is that's what that reservoir would look like if you raise that dam and double the storage. And what you're talking about is probably putting about 8.9 additional miles of river underwater with this option, which I know that sounds like a lot, but some of the other options we were looking at to provide similar amounts of storage, you're talking about 20 miles to 15 miles. So this, there are environmental effects, obviously, from doing this, but they would probably be less than building a brand new dam up in the basin.
Brian, did you want to add a few remarks here? I mean, I've heard people say in the past that the Department of Water Resources and the Water Resources Board has been more focused in the past on storage for irrigation and other purposes and less interested in flood control projects. Is there any truth to that? And if so, is that changing?
That probably is true to some degree, although I think there is a recognition that, at least in this valley, reducing flood risk would be one of the primary purposes of new storage if new storage was built. Could we go back to my first slide, Chris? Thanks.
May I have a little applause, please? You have no idea how stressful this job is.
You definitely have it for me. That's, I'm not sure I can figure out how to do that. Just a little background on why the state of Idaho and the Water Resource Board and the department are interested in new storage. Basically, the legislature in 2008 passed a series of legislation, House Joint Memorial 8 and then companion bills, House Bill 644, Senate Bill 1511, that directed the Water Resource Board to evaluate a series of potential new storage projects across the state, not just on the Boise River, but also on the Weiser River, looking at raising the existing Minidoka Dam near Burley, looking at one or more storage projects in the Henry's Fork and Teton Rivers in that part of the state. The House Joint Memorial that was part of this package of legislation laid out the legislature's thinking and rationale behind it, and I've tried to extract what I think is the key piece of that, where they talk about water use conflicts, population growth, continued unprecedented drought, urban development, conjunctive administration, Endangered Species Act requirements, and other demands are being placed on already scarce water resources of the state. Then they went on to basically direct the board to move forward and evaluating the series of potential projects. Want to touch on a couple of points in that. Certainly, I think the population growth and urban development piece of that phrase probably is broad enough to encompass the flood control or reducing flood risk aspect of anything that we look at in the Boise River. And also the continued unprecedented drought clause is a little interesting. What the legislature was kind of inching up to, but couldn't quite bring themselves to say, was climate change.
Are those words spoken at the Department of Water Resources?
You know, they are. It took us a long time to start speaking those words, but I think we do speak those words. One of the things that's interesting about climate change, when we start looking at what the climate scientists are telling us, and we're starting to see these trends bear out in the hydrologic records. So, you know, I don't think I'm too out of bounds by saying this. What we're seeing is the runoff start to come a few weeks earlier than it used to, on average. Every year's a little different, but on average the runoff is earlier than it used to be. That's right in line with what the climate scientists told us would happen. What they're projecting for Idaho and the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rockies is that on balance we'll get the same amount of precipitation, but that in the future it will come more as winter rain and less as winter snow. Now, if you think about what that means for a second, and that has huge implications to water management. The snowpack acts as a reservoir system for us. It stores water in the mountains in the form of snow. If the water comes and then releases that over time as it melts, if that water comes in the form of rain rather than snow, we've lost that ability to store that water. So that leads us to, we have to construct more storage just to stay even before we even start talking about new uses being placed on the system. The other key trend we're seeing with climate change is that we've got more year-to-year variability in the system. The wet years are getting wetter, the dry years are getting drier. And I think that's also borne out in the hydrologic records. You know, over the last decade and a half, 2 decades or so, where we've seen that. The challenge that creates is that our current storage system, not only on the Boise River, but also in other systems around the state, are not large enough to capture those increased wet year flows and hold that water over for those dry years to make it available and fill that gap during those dry years. So those two things related to climate change are really, really important as we move forward and look at new storage being placed on our hydrologic systems. If we look around the West, many of those other Western states are dealing with the same challenges that we are. And in fact, many Western states are building new storage in response to this. California's got a couple under construction as we speak. Colorado just finished a couple. Utah's built a couple. Wyoming, my gosh, if Wyoming can do it, we ought to be able to do it. So, you know, and our legislature has looked at that and said, you know, we need to at least take a hard look at whether new storage is part of the solution to some of these problems we're facing.
At IEF, we pride ourselves on being fair and balanced. Is there anyone on the panel that would like to speak against climate change, to deny its existence? Anyone in the audience? That's kind of remarkable, isn't it? I mean, there may be some shy person here who doesn't believe in it, but we've come a long ways. I mean, it was not very long ago where you would put this many people in a room and not find anybody who did not recognize that this is something that's happening. That's the good news. I think the bad news is that we haven't gone very far in actually dealing with it. Steve, are you going to be a climate change denier?
Well, I'm going to say we're just damn ignorant if we say there isn't climate change, because 15,000 years ago we had an ice age down here. And to say that climate change is something new and we should be surprised, it's been going on forever. We just happen to be in a position of change. We don't like change, but we need to recognize that it's been happening.
If I could I have you move to my next slide, and I'll just give a little more background about the Water Resource Board's involvement in this study and how it came about. As has been mentioned, the board is partnering with the Corps. After that last presentation, we may need to scratch our head a little bit and think about. I'm just kidding, Ellen. The Corps did receive the feasibility study authority from Congress to carry out this study. And as part of that authority, the Water Resource Board was actually granted a $500,000 credit toward the cost of that study. So that's one of the major reasons we took this opportunity. And I think the board's goals here are twofold. The first is certainly to carry out that legislative direction that the board's been given to look at additional water storage for flood control, water supply, and other uses. The second is to evaluate whether storage could be used to meet the future water needs identified in the Treasure Valley Comprehensive Aquifer Management Plan. And that, you know, there's that nice article written by Rocky Barker in the Statesman on a front page story on this past Sunday that talked about that. The Treasure Valley camp identified or documented or projected, I should say, that we'll need another 80 to 170,000 acre feet of new water supply by 2060. So the board wants to look and see if that new storage could be used to help meet that new need. There are certainly other strategies laid out in the camp as well that we'll be looking at through other mechanisms. I guess with that, I think that's about all the high points that I wanted to cover.
Let me direct a question to Liz, if I may. Liz, going back to Rocky Barker's article, you were not quoted, but Peter Anderson was with Trout Unlimited. I don't believe Peter's with us today, but he was a past presenter. I think it was last summer. Peter Anderson was quoted in the Statesman as saying, there may be storage options we can live with, but we want to look at all of the options. Liz, speaking for you for Trout Unlimited, are there any storage options that Idaho Rivers United could live with?
Peter was being very diplomatic, which is always good when you have Rocky Barker on the other end of the phone line with you. You have to go back to the beginning. and really question the assumption that more water is going to be needed than what the current supplies provide for right now. Because if you can look across the West, you can look across the world and see many, many communities that you have larger populations but use less water than they did 20, 30, 50 years ago. If water cost a little bit more in this valley, I can promise you water would be used a lot more efficiently, and there'd be a lot more conservation. And Idaho Rivers United really believes that we can make our existing supplies last a very long time. We also believe that building a large slab of concrete does not create water. And that if you want to build a new dam and use it for flood control, and as Pat pointed out earlier, you have this tug between, is it going to be full, so that, I mean, the cities can't just say, oh, this is going to be our water supply for our customers in 2060. Oh, oops, there's no water there this year. Well, maybe you'll get some water next year. Just hold on. You can't do that. It has to be totally reliable. And same thing for irrigation, for agriculture. It has to be reliable. So you have this tug of war between having a full reservoir and having an empty reservoir if you actually want to have a reliable flood risk reduction component in there. Well, from the studies that we've had done for us, I feel pretty comfortable saying that you are going to have an empty reservoir most of the time. If you build a new, if you raise Arrow Rock, I mean, they won't be empty because there's already water that's allocated for that right now. But that you are not, there just isn't, God does not create, or whoever does not create more water just because you spend $1 billion and put a slab of concrete out there. And you can look at the Murray-Darling Basin in Australia to see just how much money they spent and how little water they got from it. So we really want this study that the Corps and the Water Board are in the middle of to take to number one, go back and really examine that question of what is the water demand going to be, and really and how far can we stretch our water supply. So not just assume people are going to use the same amount of water as they do right now. Water supply will be less reliable because of climate change. And then to put all the options on ways to reduce demand on the water supply side, and look at all the different options that are available for flood risk reduction as well. And Idaho Rivers United thinks that we're going to be able to solve our problems with non-structural, hugely expensive, and I would argue very unreliable strategies.
So I take it your answer was no?
Well, I also, because I've had Peter Anderson elbowing me in the side many times if I've chimed up. I try to be diplomatic, and I always like to say that we will consider it when you bring a proposal in front of us and take a good look at it when the information is available. So we are not blindly anti-new dam.
Well, if I understood the main point, and I think it's one that we would all agree with, that creating a dam or placing a dam in a river or increasing the height of an existing dam doesn't change the amount of water that is flowing in the river. But some would think that it might change your ability to capture that water. And I take it your observation is that that may not occur.
That the Boise Basin is fully appropriated. And so you cannot capture and store water that is already allocated to somebody else. So when it's raining, how are you going to know if that water is already allocated? That drop that falls, it's not until the season is, until you're pretty much at June that you know how much water you have and how it's going to be. I mean, Rex can attest to this, and how it's going to be distributed out. And you could not, the new allocation, the junior allocation, unless somehow this new storage facility is going to somehow trump existing water rights, which there's a lot of problem with that, then I wouldn't want to have to jump into that foray. So you, again, you cannot have a city and you cannot have a farm if you have to wait until June every year to know if you're going to have any water, or even until, you know, April 30th or something. I mean, and you cannot also build a dam and just keep the water there year after year after year. I mean, unless state water plan and the state water policy has changed, and I don't know if it's in the Constitution or not, you know, that you cannot just hoard water. That they can carry it over for one season now, and then that's it. So, you know, if your high year comes 10 years before your multiple year drought, you know, you're dry.
Could I clarify that one of the points Liz made?
Correct me.
Not entirely. Liz made the point that the Boise River is fully appropriated. That is true during the irrigation season. That's not true during the winter and the high runoff season. So there is unappropriated water in the river that could be utilized during those periods of time. The problem is you need a place to catch it, and hold it. And that's why we talk about new storage.
Question here?
I want to comment in that regard. I'm glad that Liz said that what if we build a dam and it's empty? That is a good news for me, because we need to manage that emptiness, which we are doing currently in Lucky Peak. So we are fighting now in Lucky Peak because we want, for flood control, we want the reservoir empty, but for irrigation purposes, we want it in full. So if we price any dam, or if we create a new dam for just keeping that empty, for bringing the water for flood control, I think it's very well.
Question or comment?
I was wondering if there was any other alternatives looked at that weren't raising the dam or building a dam, like storage of water in wetlands, and maybe putting wetlands instead of ballparks in, and that idea, perhaps.
I'll take a shot at the water supply solutions during the Treasure Valley Comprehensive Aquifer Management Plan process, or CAMP process. There are a number of strategies to meet the future water supply needs laid out in that document, and some of them include exchanging out water that's currently sent down from Lucky Peak for flow augmentation. Although you have to develop another source somewhere else in order to do that.
That would be the Galloway project, or are we talking about something else?
Potentially, that's one of our thoughts behind the Galloway project. But there are other options, like maybe buying out some more high lift rights, like we did with the Bell Rapids water right acquisition. Or other water supply alternatives, certainly water conservation, where it doesn't impact incidental recharge to the aquifer, is high on the priority list as well. As far as flood risk alternatives, I'm going to have to let Ellen answer that part of the question.
For this current iteration of the study, nothing else has been looked at, not because we're not going to. It's just our current scope of work and agreement with the board was to start out by looking at surface water storage, but we intend to look at other alternatives. There have historically been other structural type alternatives that have been mentioned or looked at in the past. Many people may not realize that Lucky Peak, when it was authorized for flood risk reduction, back then it was called flood control, we don't say that anymore, but when it was authorized, it was not, there were other pieces and parts to that project, and there was supposed to be some levees that were built up and down the river, and the goal was to construct levees and the dams so that we could get 10,000 CFS through this river. And we can't do that now with all the development that's occurred. The court did, at the request of Canyon County, relook at building those levees, I think in the 70s. And again, again, you know, levees, it's another structural thing. It does have environmental impacts, and there are a lot of people opposed to it, so that never went forward. So mostly what's been mentioned historically has been structural, but I will tell you that the Corps has really learned a lot, I think, from historically what they've done, and they realize that there have been some significant impacts, and sometimes it does more damage than good. And they are really right now stressing non-structural options for flood risk reduction too. Again, it's not for the Corps to tell the community what those should be. It's really up to the community to decide what level of risk they want to live with and what they're willing to pay to reduce that risk. But some options out there that other communities are looking at is buying people out of the floodplain. That's expensive too when you think about the number of homes we have in harm's way right now. You could do elevating homes. You could do ring levees around homes. So they're not levees that are necessarily interfering with the river itself, but might protect a structure. There are ways that you could reduce your risk financially by encouraging and trying to get more people to purchase flood insurance. It doesn't necessarily reduce damage per se, but it helps reduce the economic risk to a community when they get hit by a flood, because people may not realize when there's a flood here and FEMA comes in, they don't just hand money to the homeowners that are uninsured. They give you loans. So when the flood comes, it's not just going to be the infrastructure where there's going to be damage. It's going to be a huge economic hit to everybody, not just the people living in the floodplain. Any of us that live in this community are going to be impacted by a flood. So even if you don't live in the